They say family stands by you no matter what. But what happens when your own sister crosses the line, demanding $35,000 to cover her gambling debt, and when I refused, she threw water in my face? This isn't just about money. It's about respect, betrayal, and the moment I decided enough was enough. Family is supposed to be the one place where you feel safe. The one place where you don't have to question people's intentions. Growing up, I always believed that blood meant loyalty, that no matter what, my sister and I would protect each other from the world. We fought, of course, like all siblings do, but deep down I carried this unshakable trust that when things got serious, she would have my back and I would have hers. That belief, that bond, is what made the betrayal sting so much more than anything else ever could. Because when betrayal comes from outside, it hurts, but when it comes from your own family, it cuts straight to the soul. My sister was never the type to ask for help directly. She always wrapped her requests in stories, in guilt trips, in emotional appeals that made it sound like she was doing me a favor by letting me step in. She had a way of dressing up her dependence as closeness, disguising her weakness as love. She would say things like, "You know you're the only one I can trust," or, "If you really love me, you'll understand." Those words sound harmless at first, even flattering, but when you peel them back, they carry a hidden weapon. They make you feel like saying no is the same as betraying the bond you share. And that's how betrayal begins, quiet, invisible, disguised as love. When she came to me about her gambling debt, she didn't present it as a reckless mistake of her own making. She painted it like a crisis that we both had to solve together. She used words like "we" and "us" as though her problem was suddenly my responsibility. She sat there, voice trembling, talking about how desperate she was, how the people she owed money to were pressuring her, how scared she felt. And as she spoke, she kept slipping in phrases designed to corner me. "You're the only one who can save me. If you don't help, I don't know what I'll do." At first, I felt that pull of sympathy. That's what family does, right? We see them in pain and instinct takes over. We want to help. We want to ease their suffering. But even in that moment, something in her eyes told a different story. Behind the tears, behind the quiver in her voice, I saw a glint of calculation. It wasn't just desperation, it was expectation. She wasn't asking me to help, she was demanding it, but in the sweetest disguise possible. That's when it hit me. This wasn't love. This wasn't family standing together. This was manipulation wrapped in the language of loyalty. The betrayal didn't start when she threw water in my face. It started the moment she chose to weaponize our bond, the moment she used my love for her as leverage to cover up her mistakes. Betrayal often doesn't scream, it whispers. It comes dressed as kindness, as trust, as vulnerability. But beneath the disguise, it's sharp and deliberate. She wasn't looking at me as her sibling in that moment. She was looking at me as a wallet, a lifeline, a way to escape consequences she had created for herself. The hardest part was realizing that I had missed the warning signs. This wasn't the first time she had played this game. Over the years, there had been smaller moments, times when she leaned on me for things she should have handled on her own, times when she guilted me into giving more than I could afford, emotionally or financially. Each time, she cloaked it as love, as family loyalty, and I fell for it. I told myself that's what good siblings do. I told myself she would do the same for me if the roles were reversed. But deep down, I knew the truth. If I ever asked her for the same sacrifice, she would vanish, or worse, twist it into another chance to take advantage. That realization shook me. Because love, real love, doesn't demand blind sacrifice. Real love doesn't hold your loyalty hostage. Real love asks, but never forces. What my sister did was something else entirely. It was betrayal disguised as love, manipulation hidden in the mask of family devotion. And the cruelest part of betrayal like that is how it makes you doubt yourself. It makes you wonder if you're cold for saying no, if you're heartless for refusing. It flips the script so suddenly that you start to question your own values, your own boundaries. You find yourself thinking, maybe I should help. Maybe I'm being selfish. But the truth is, betrayal thrives in that confusion. It feeds off guilt. It grows stronger every time you choose silence instead of confrontation, every time you allow yourself to be cornered instead of standing firm. And that's exactly what my sister counted on, that I would cave under the weight of guilt, that I would blur the line between love and obligation, that I would hand over not just the money, but also the power she was trying to steal from me. Looking back, it's chilling how normal it all seemed in the moment. How easily betrayal slipped into my life, disguised as family love, disguised as loyalty. How I almost believed it was my duty to sacrifice my peace, my savings, my dignity for someone who wouldn't hesitate to discard me the second I stopped being useful. That's the nature of betrayal. It doesn't announce itself. It smiles, it hugs you, it calls you family. And then, when you least expect it, it demands everything you have to give, leaving you torn between love and survival. The number itself hit me like a punch to the stomach. $35,000. It wasn't the kind of amount you hear in casual conversation, the kind of money someone might borrow to get through a tough month or to pay off a sudden emergency. This was a life-changing sum, a debt that could crush someone's future, and she spoke it out loud as if it were nothing. I sat there, trying to process whether she was serious, whether I had heard her correctly, and all the while she looked at me as though my hesitation was the real problem. To her, it was simple. She owed it, I had it, and therefore I should pay it. The way she said it was almost rehearsed, like she had been practicing how to drop the number in front of me without flinching. There wasn't a trace of shame in her voice, no real regret, no acknowledgement of how reckless or selfish it was to gamble away that much money. She leaned into me with wide, pleading eyes, her tone dripping with urgency, trying to make the amount seem less terrifying by wrapping it in desperation. But desperation doesn't change the reality of the number. $35,000 isn't just a mistake, it's a choice stacked on top of countless bad choices, each one fueled by the belief that someone else would clean up the mess. For a moment, I felt the room spinning. My mind started racing through every bill I had, every responsibility that weighed on my own shoulders. I thought about my rent, my savings, the sacrifices I made to keep my life stable. And in the middle of that, I was expected to casually throw all of it away to save her from the consequences she had chosen for herself. She didn't even frame it as a request, it was a demand, hidden behind trembling words and watery eyes. It was clear in the way she spoke. This wasn't a favor she was hoping for, it was a solution she believed she was entitled to. That's what made the demand so shocking. Not just the number, but the entitlement behind it. There was no apology, no ownership of the choices that led her there. She didn't come to me humbly, asking for guidance or admitting how badly she had messed up. She came to me like a customer at a bank, like I was obligated to give her what she needed without question. The more I thought about it, the more outrageous it became. Because even if I had the money, even if handing it over wouldn't have hurt me, the principle of it burned deeper than the number itself. I could see the way she tried to control the room, how she adjusted her tone each time she noticed me wavering. When I looked doubtful, she turned up the dramatics, describing how dangerous the people she owed were, how badly things could turn out if she didn't pay soon. When I looked sympathetic, she softened, talking about our childhood, about how I had always been the one she could count on. It was like she had a script in her head, switching from fear to nostalgia to guilt until she found the angle that worked. Every sentence was a weapon designed to chip away at my resistance. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about money. This was about control. She wanted me to feel cornered, to believe that not giving her what she wanted would make me responsible for whatever happened next. She wanted to place the weight of her reckless choices on my shoulders, to turn her crisis into my crisis. And in that moment, I realized that if I gave in once, it would never end. $35,000 today, something else tomorrow, and each time she would push the boundary further, because she knew I could be broken down. The silence after she said the number hung in the air like a threat. It was the kind of silence that demanded a response, and she leaned into it, staring at me with a mix of expectation and impatience. My heart pounded in my chest, not just from the size of the number, but from the audacity of the request. This wasn't a stranger trying to scam me. This was my own sister, someone who knew my weaknesses, someone who knew exactly which strings to pull. And she was pulling them without hesitation, as if family loyalty meant I didn't have a choice. I thought about all the things I could have done with that money. The places I wanted to go, the security I was building for myself, the dreams I had quietly nurtured. Each of those was being casually dismissed in her demand, as if my future was less important than fixing the damage of her past. That was the cruelest part of it, not just that she wanted the money, but that she expected me to sacrifice my stability, my peace, and my dignity without question. She didn't see me as a person with my own struggles. She saw me as her safety net, her way out, her shortcut. The more I sat there, the more I realized how little respect she had for me in that moment. If she had respected me, she would have come to me differently. If she had respected me, she would have carried her burden instead of trying to dump it on me. But the shocking truth of that $35,000 demand was that it revealed everything I needed to know about where I stood in her life. I wasn't her sibling to be loved and cherished. I was her last resort, her emergency fund, the person she could drain when she had nowhere else to turn. Humiliation cuts deeper when it happens in private, but when it's performed in front of others, it becomes something else entirely. It's no longer just an insult. It's a spectacle, a show meant to strip away your dignity piece by piece while everyone else watches. That was exactly what my sister wanted when she threw that glass of water in my face. It wasn't about cooling her anger or some impulsive reaction. It was deliberate. She wanted witnesses. She wanted to mark me as the villain, the selfish sibling who wouldn't step up. In that moment, she turned my refusal into a stage, and I was forced into the role of the heartless betrayer. The people around us froze. You could hear the sharp intake of breath, the shuffle of feet, the awkward silence that follows when no one knows if they should intervene. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment, and some simply turned away, not wanting to be part of the mess. I stood there, drenched, my face stinging not from the water, but from the weight of their eyes. Every drop rolling down my cheek felt like a reminder of how far she was willing to go to twist the narrative. She raised her voice then, making sure her words carried across the room. She accused me of abandoning her, of turning my back when she needed me most. She painted herself as the desperate sister, the victim of circumstance, while I was cast as the cold, unfeeling one who valued money more than blood. Each sentence she spoke wasn't just directed at me, it was aimed at the audience, carefully crafted to frame the scene in her favor. She knew exactly how to play the part, how to cry on cue, how to let her voice break just enough to draw sympathy. In those minutes, I realized that the water wasn't the real humiliation. The real humiliation was the performance. The water was just the opening act, a dramatic gesture to capture attention. What followed was the script she had rehearsed in her head, and I was powerless to stop her from delivering it. She wanted me cornered not just by her words, but by the gaze of everyone around us. She wanted me to feel the pressure, to break under the weight of public opinion, to cave in and hand over the money just to silence the whispers. I could see it working on some of them. I caught the disapproving stares, the muttered comments under their breath, the way some shook their heads as if I was the one who had crossed the line. They didn't know the whole story. They didn't know the lies, the manipulation, the entitlement behind that demand. All they saw was a sister in tears, water dripping down my face, and the image of me standing there silent. To them, silence looked like guilt, like proof that I had no defense. And that's exactly what she wanted. What made it worse was how practiced she was. She knew how to tilt her head, how to let the tears fall at the right moment, how to lower her voice to just above a whisper so that people leaned in closer, making them feel complicit in her suffering. She knew how to use vulnerability as a weapon, and in that moment, she wielded it perfectly. I was watching not just my sister, but an actress performing on a stage, and I was cast as her unwilling antagonist. The sting of humiliation wasn't just in the moment, it was in knowing how long that memory would linger. Everyone who witnessed it would carry their version of the story with them. They would retell it later, perhaps exaggerating details, perhaps omitting the context entirely, but always with the image of me standing there, wet and silent, while she cried about betrayal. Humiliation spreads faster than truth. It seeps into conversations, into perceptions, until it hardens into reputation. And that's what she was counting on, that the shame of that moment would linger long enough to break me down. I stood there, feeling smaller with every passing second, and all I could think was how calculated it all was. The water was meant to shock me, but the words were meant to destroy me. It was a strategy, not an outburst. She knew that in private I could stand my ground, I could argue, I could refuse without fear of anyone else's opinion. But in public, the rules changed. Public humiliation turns into pressure, and pressure turns into compliance. That was the trap she had set. And yet, as much as it hurt, as much as my pride burned under the eyes of strangers, there was a clarity in that moment too. Because humiliation has a strange way of stripping everything down to its rawest form. It shows you who the other person really is, not in the shadows, not in whispered conversations, but under the harsh light where everyone can see. And what I saw was someone who wasn't ashamed of betraying me, someone who wasn't afraid to sacrifice my dignity if it meant saving herself. That's what made the humiliation so powerful. It revealed the truth she had been hiding all along. Refusing her wasn't easy. It wasn't as simple as saying no and walking away, because that word carried so much weight in our family dynamic. Growing up, I had been the one who always gave in, the one who smoothed over arguments, the one who sacrificed to keep the peace. Saying no wasn't just denying her, it was breaking a pattern, shattering an unspoken rule that I had been conditioned to follow. So when I finally looked her in the eye and told her I wasn't going to pay, the silence that followed felt like a bomb waiting to go off. At first, she blinked as if she hadn't heard me correctly. She repeated the number again, slower this time, as if maybe I hadn't grasped the seriousness of the situation. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply said no. That's when I saw the shift in her face. The desperation vanished in an instant, replaced by something darker, anger, sharp, and cutting. It was as though the mask she had been wearing fell off, and I finally saw the raw frustration underneath. Her voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the air. She accused me of being selfish, of caring more about money than about her safety. She spat out words designed to wound, twisting the refusal into a betrayal of family, a sign that I didn't love her enough to sacrifice for her. Every word was aimed at piercing my guilt, at making me question my decision, at dragging me back into the same old cycle of giving in. She didn't just want my money, she wanted to break my will. When I stood my ground, her outburst escalated. Her hands moved wildly as she gestured, knocking over a glass from the table. She slammed her palm against the surface, making the room shake. She shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear, making sure her rage wasn't confined to me alone but broadcast for anyone within earshot. Her words became crueler with every sentence, digging into old wounds, dragging up past mistakes, throwing them in my face as if they were proof that I owed her now. She called me cold, heartless, ungrateful. She said I had forgotten every moment she had ever been there for me, painting herself as the saint and me as the monster. But her stories were half-truths, twisted versions of reality designed to make her look noble and me look cruel. What struck me most was how quickly the desperation had vanished. The tears were gone. The trembling was gone. In their place was fury, as if the real her had been waiting beneath the surface all along, just waiting for the moment when I dared to defy her. The louder she got, the calmer I forced myself to become. Not because I wasn't shaken, I was. My heart was pounding, my chest tight with the weight of her words. But I knew that showing weakness would only fuel her rage. I knew that if I gave her even a sliver of hesitation, she would exploit it, twist it, and use it as proof that I could still be broken down. So I kept my voice steady, even as the storm around me grew louder. Each time she demanded an answer, I gave the same one, no. That word became a weapon in itself. It cut through her shouting like steel, each repetition harder, firmer, more certain. The more I said it, the more unhinged she became. Her anger wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about losing control. For so long, she had relied on her ability to bend me to her will, to use guilt and manipulation as tools to get what she wanted. My refusal wasn't just a denial of $35,000, it was a denial of the power she had always held over me. And she couldn't stand it. Her face twisted with rage, her voice cracked from screaming, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked at me as though I was the enemy, not her sibling, as though my refusal was an act of war. And in a way, it was. It was the first time I had drawn a line she couldn't cross, the first time I had chosen my own dignity over her demands. Her outburst was the sound of control slipping through her fingers, and she fought with everything she had to claw it back. The room felt heavy with the tension, every second dragging on as though the walls themselves were listening. I could feel the eyes of others nearby, drawn in by the chaos, silently judging, silently waiting to see what I would do. Each scream echoed off the walls, bouncing back to me, forcing me to face not only her rage, but the years of silence I had endured. The humiliation of the water on my face was one thing, but the humiliation of being screamed at, accused, and degraded in front of others cut deeper. She wanted me to crumble. She wanted me to beg forgiveness for daring to stand up to her. But the more she raged, the more I realized something important. Her outburst wasn't proof of strength, it was proof of weakness. Strong people don't need to scream to be heard. Secure people don't need to humiliate others to prove a point. Her anger was the sound of fear, the fear of losing her hold on me, the fear of facing the consequences of her own actions without me as her shield. And though I didn't say it out loud, that realization gave me a quiet strength that no amount of shouting could take away. For as long as I could remember, she had been the one pulling the strings, guiding conversations in her favor, turning every situation into proof that I owed her something. She thrived on control, on the quiet satisfaction of watching me bend to her will. Each time she played the victim, each time she cloaked her demands in guilt and sentiment, she gained a little more ground. And I, out of love, out of duty, out of habit, gave it to her. But something shifted the moment I said no. For the first time, the strings she had wrapped around me began to loosen, and I could see the web she had woven for what it really was, a trap built not on love, but on manipulation. The key to turning the tables wasn't to fight her with the same tactics she used. She wanted me emotional, reactive, guilty. She wanted me to break down, to argue, to get tangled in the mess of her words. If I shouted back, she could twist it. If I cried, she could use it. If I gave even an inch of hesitation, she would pounce. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I went quiet. I let her rage echo around me like fire starving for air. And in that silence, she began to falter. Because manipulators thrive on reaction. They need fuel, they need resistance, they need you to play the role they've written for you. The moment you step off script, they lose their power. I watched her closely as her voice grew louder, then weaker, then louder again, as though she was testing each weapon in her arsenal. She hurled accusations, she dredged up memories, she tried to paint me as ungrateful, heartless, cold. But each time, I simply looked at her and repeated the same calm truth: no. I wasn't going to pay her gambling debt. I wasn't going to shoulder the burden of her choices. And no matter how many tears she shed, no matter how many people she tried to pull into the scene, my answer wasn't going to change. The more I refused to bend, the more unsettled she became. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of doubt, the frustration of losing control. She had expected me to crumble the way I always had, to eventually cave in under the pressure of her words. She hadn't prepared for resistance. She hadn't prepared for me to finally see her tactics for what they were. And as much as she tried to escalate, to claw her way back into control, every second I held firm was another second she lost her grip. Turning the tables meant more than just refusing her demand. It meant exposing the truth behind her behavior, not by shouting it to the room, but by forcing her to reveal it herself. When she saw her usual tricks failing, she grew desperate. The cracks began to show. The sweetness disappeared, the fake tears dried up, and all that remained was raw entitlement. She stopped pretending it was about family or love and began screaming about what she deserved. That was the moment the mask truly shattered. The audience who had been watching her performance began to see what I had always known, that this wasn't about survival or loyalty. It was about greed. In that moment, the humiliation she had tried to paint onto me began to slide back onto her. People whispered, their sympathetic glances shifting away from her and toward me. They saw the way she clawed and demanded, the way her words twisted and contradicted themselves. They saw someone who wasn't a victim but an aggressor, someone who wasn't desperate but manipulative. And I didn't have to expose her, I simply had to stand there, calm and unshaken, and let her expose herself. There is power in refusing to be moved. Power in standing still when someone expects you to collapse. Each no I gave her wasn't just a denial of her request, it was a declaration of independence. For years, she had fed off my compliance, but that day I starved her of it. I let her rage spin itself out, let her words echo into emptiness, until they began to lose their force. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she no longer had the hold on me she thought she did. And in that realization, the balance shifted. Turning the tables wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about hurting her the way she had hurt me. It was about reclaiming my own power, my own voice, my own right to say no without shame. It was about making it clear that I wouldn't be her scapegoat, her safety net, or her excuse. She had built her confidence on the assumption that I would always fold, and when I didn't, her entire strategy crumbled. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to accuse. All I had to do was stand firm in the truth and let her unravel. Because manipulators don't know how to handle resistance, they only know how to exploit weakness. And the moment they can't find it, the moment they realize their tricks don't work anymore, they lose everything. That was the moment I saw her power over me break. That was the moment I understood that the tables had finally turned. Regret has a way of showing itself, not in words, but in the silence that follows after every trick has failed. I saw it in her eyes that day, the exact moment when the reality of her choices crashed down around her. It wasn't immediate, not while she was shouting, not while she was still performing, not while she was trying to make me look like the villain. It came later, when her voice finally cracked, when her anger began to sound more like desperation than power, when she realized that no amount of guilt, no amount of screaming, and no amount of humiliation could make me bend anymore. That's when regret took its place on her face, heavy and undeniable. It started small, with a flicker in her expression, the moment she noticed the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. The people she thought she had convinced were no longer shaking their heads at me but at her. Their whispers had shifted from sympathy to judgment. She could feel it, the way their eyes pierced her, the way the energy in the room turned against her. Manipulators feed on validation, and when it slips away, they stumble. That flicker of doubt, of realizing the audience wasn't applauding her act, was the first crack in her armor. She tried to cover it, of course. She forced her voice louder, her words sharper, but there was a trembling edge now that hadn't been there before. Her accusations started to repeat themselves, as though she was running out of ammunition. Her stories became inconsistent, her performance less convincing. And then it happened, the silence. Not from me, but from her. She stopped mid-sentence, her chest rising and falling as though she had suddenly run out of breath. In that silence, the truth filled the space between us. She wasn't in control anymore. She wasn't the one writing the story. And in that silence, she began to regret. Regret is cruel because it forces you to face yourself. She had spent so long blaming me, blaming others, blaming circumstances, that she had never paused to look at the mess she had created with her own hands. But in that moment, with the water dried from my face and the word no echoing in the air, she couldn't escape it. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but all she found were folded arms and shaking heads. The stage she had built so carefully had collapsed, and now she was left standing alone in the wreckage. It was unforgettable because I had never seen her like that before. Vulnerability had always been her weapon, a mask she wore to get what she wanted. But this was different. This wasn't a performance. This was the real thing. The tears that welled up in her eyes weren't part of an act. They were the tears of someone who realized too late that she had gone too far, that she had burned bridges she could never rebuild. Her regret wasn't for the money, she still wanted that. Her regret was for losing the one thing she had always counted on, me. She had believed, with all her confidence, that I would never change, that I would always bend, always sacrifice, always put her above myself. That belief had given her power for years, but it crumbled the moment I refused. And in its place came the dawning realization that the version of me she depended on no longer existed. She wasn't facing the same sibling she had manipulated 100 times before. She was facing someone who had finally woken up, who had finally drawn a line, and who wasn't afraid to hold it. That was the moment she regretted underestimating me. What made it unforgettable wasn't just her face, but the silence that lingered after. The room was quiet, and for the first time, she didn't know what to say. The people watching weren't going to save her, and I wasn't going to give her the answer she wanted. She was trapped in the very situation she had tried to trap me in. The regret settled on her shoulders like a weight, pulling her down, and for once, she didn't have the strength to fight it off. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown, not the kind you see in movies. It was subtle, but I saw every detail. The way her shoulders slumped. The way her hands, once clenched in fists, began to shake. The way she avoided my eyes, unable to look at the sibling who had refused to play her game. She wanted to hate me, but the truth was written all over her expression. She hated herself more in that moment. She regretted the water, the shouting, the humiliation, but most of all, she regretted pushing me so far that I no longer cared about her demands. That memory burned itself into me because it wasn't just about her. It was about me too. For years, I had dreamed of a moment like that, when the manipulator finally saw the damage they had done, when the mask finally slipped and the truth came out. And seeing it unfold right in front of me was unforgettable, not because it was sweet or satisfying, but because it was real. She couldn't take it back, couldn't erase the look on her face, couldn't undo the way her regret exposed her in front of everyone. That's the thing about unforgettable moments. They don't come when you expect them. They don't arrive with fanfare or dramatic gestures. They come quietly, in the cracks of someone's pride, in the silence that follows after their last weapon has failed. Her regret wasn't loud, but it was permanent. And once I saw it, I knew I would never forget the way everything shifted in that instant.